Hello, good evening everyone, and welcome to Kellogg College, and welcome to the GCHU, the Global Centre on Healthcare and Urbanisation, to the last of our public seminar series for this academic year. GCHU brings together interests in sustainable urban development with health and well-being. So really we're around how to create healthy cities. And that can cover all sorts of different areas, including, as we see today, what makes age-friendly neighbourhoods. So I won't say much now because I'd like to hand over to Dr. Hannah Grove, who is a new postdoc researcher that we have at GCHU. She brings interests in age-friendly places, ageing well in place, and in particular age-friendly neighbourhoods. She's joined us from Ireland, from Maynooth University just outside Dublin, where she did her PhD and a series of postdocs before joining us. And so she brings particular interests in age-friendly neighbourhoods. And so I'd like to hand over to her to chair the seminar. We've got a fascinating lineup of speakers, so I'd just like to extend a warm welcome and thank you to our four speakers as well. So, Hannah, thanks very much.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. A very warm welcome to all of you and to our panel this evening. So I'm delighted to be chairing this public seminar today on the topic of age-friendly neighbourhoods. And this is an important topic, recognising that our population is ageing and we are becoming an increasingly older society. Nationally, nearly 40% of people in the UK are aged 50 and over, and almost 20% are aged over 65. We are also expecting large increases in the number of people aged 85 and over the coming decades. And our older population is becoming increasingly diverse, and there are wide variations in our everyday experiences, needs and wishes and aspirations. Yet there are also significant inequalities across this age group in terms of health and mobility, resources including income, and environmental circumstances including neighbourhood contexts and housing situations. So I suppose a key question that I'm interested in is how can we ensure that older people achieve and maintain a good quality of life in old age? And to do this, I believe it's an important thing to consider the how and the where of ageing, and to proactively plan for a diverse ageing society. In particular, we need to consider how supportive our physical and social environments are for older people and their changing needs over time. This recognises the important role that our neighbourhoods and communities play in influencing our health and well-being over a lifetime. In this seminar, we will be exploring what an age-friendly environment looks like, and will identify some of the approaches already in existence and might still be required to support older people with diverse health, social and mobility needs to age well in their communities and neighbourhoods. And we have a great lineup of speakers this afternoon who will be giving their perspectives on this topic before we then hand over to the audience for questions. So for those who are new to this format of the seminars, each speaker will present for approximately 5 minutes before we move on to the question part. So now to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker this afternoon is Charlotte Lewis. Charlotte is based at the Centre for Ageing Better, which is a charity funded by the National Lottery Community Fund, working to create a society where everyone enjoys later life. Charlotte oversees the UK's growing network of age-friendly communities, and she will be providing us with the national picture and summarising some of the work that she is doing at the Centre on this topic. Our second speaker is Sir Tony Baldry, the convener of Age Friendly Banbury. Tony previously worked for 3 decades as a Member of Parliament for Oxfordshire and stood down in 2015. In 2016, he became the High Steward of Banbury and was appointed a Deputy Lieutenant for Oxfordshire. He has been involved in a range of charities, including the Age Friendly Banbury project. And today, Tony will be providing us with a local example of an age-friendly community and will share some examples of the work that Banbury is doing. Our third speaker is Kelly Marie Rogers, who has travelled from Manchester to join us today. Kelly has a background in architecture and is the strategic lead for Healthy Active Places at Greater Manchester Moving, which is a sports partnership with a shared mission to enable active lives for all. Kelly is a member of the Greater Manchester Ageing Hub and recently co-authored a guide on creating age-friendly developments, and we'll be talking about this today. Our final speaker is Professor George Leeson, who is a co-director of the Oxford Institute of Population Ageing, just round the corner. which is an internationally recognised centre leading on research on ageing and longevity and the social and demographic implications of longer lives. George's main research interests relate to the demographic inequalities of global ageing, migration and longevity, and he will be providing us with the global perspective of some of the key factors that we need to consider when thinking about age-friendly neighbourhoods. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Charlotte Lewis, to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here with you all. So I'm going to start, and when we discuss what an age-friendly neighbourhood is, I'm going to use the language of an age-friendly community, as I'm going to introduce this age-friendly community concept that's been developed by the World Health Organization that we support communities across the UK to use, which I think is applicable here at a neighbourhood level as well. So what is an age-friendly community? Well, we use this definition. We say that an age-friendly community is a place that enables people to age well and live a good later life. So there's two key elements of that. So an age-friendly community should promote the behaviours that help us stay healthy and more active for longer, thinking about what things are needed across the life course, but also support people to live a good later life. So reducing barriers to our staying involved or contributing in later stages of life as well. So what might that mean? That's somewhere where people can stay living in their homes, participate in the activities that they value and contribute to their communities for as long as possible. Now, as I said, the World Health Organization has developed this age-friendly framework, which was developed back in 2007 in consultation with older people around the world. And this framework acts as a guide for communities to achieve this goal and is being adopted by lots of different communities across the world. So to introduce that framework here, one of the core kind of parts of it is these 8 domains of age-friendly. So these 8 domains are the aspects of community life that we would say that a community needs to be considering when making their plans to make their area a better place to age. And you'll see they cover a range of different elements. So they cover the built environment, so looking at areas like at the top, like outdoor spaces and buildings, transportation and housing. The social environment, thinking about social participation, respect and social inclusion, and civic participation and employment. And also the more statutory environments as well, considering how information and communication flows and what community support and health services there are. Now, we know that paying attention to the needs and perspectives of older people in a community under these different domains can mean the difference between older age becoming a barrier or not in an area. And it's important that we consider all of these things. We don't just think about ageing from a health or a social care perspective, but actually how does ageing intersect with all of these different community elements? So what does adopting this mean in practice? So in an age-friendly community, in the communities that we work with, it might be about specific initiatives or projects happening under these different domain areas, or it might be using ageing and age-friendly as a lens to look at all of the things that already exist in a community, look at existing transport strategies or what partnerships are already in place to support social participation, and thinking how age-friendly are these things. But another thing to consider when we think about these domains is how do things get done? Who needs to be involved? And how do we decide what the priorities are in our area? And how do we come together and make decisions? So some of the principles that we would say should be at the heart of an age-friendly community. It's about putting older people at the heart of decision making, creating networks, forums, mechanisms for people to have their voices heard and be closer to some of those local decisions. It's about taking a partnership approach with different stakeholders. It's not simply enough for one organisation or one department in a council to do all of this work, but you see there's so many different topics that a community needs to be working together to take action on this. It's important to take an intergenerational approach, considering what needs there are across the life course. It's an age-friendly community for a reason. It's not an older person community. It's about how do we support generations to come together. And importantly, an age-friendly community should be one that commits to make improvements on these different areas at whatever pace they can, whatever resources they have. It's not about, we would say it's not about achieving a certain standard to say you're an age-friendly community, but saying we're going to work harder and we're going to look to make improvements. So that's the kind of formulaic frameworks, principles, things, but what does that mean in real life? Well, we support communities across the UK that are adopting that framework in different ways. And as a result, they're creating their own projects, initiatives and partnerships to make improvements in their area. So that might be like what's happening in Bolton. They've been running walk audits, so bringing together a diverse range of older people to inform the redevelopment of the town centre, and that's already resulted in changes like changing where drop curbs are placed, changing pedestrian crossing times, bringing together developers and older residents to witness firsthand their experience of navigating these public spaces. In the Isle of Wight, they've been developing age-friendly awareness training. That's training that's delivered to many different service providers to support them to consider the needs of their older customers, including being mandatory on that island's main bus operator. In Sunderland, they've been supporting a voluntary role for Ageing Well ambassadors. So they have over 200 local residents who are committed to sharing messages about ageing well with their friends, family and local community, and getting involved in local initiatives like the Older People's Radio programme that's just been set up in Sunderland. And in Greater Manchester, they've been running a pension credit uptake campaign. So that's making older residents locally more aware of some of the benefits they might be entitled to. And that's already brought millions of pounds more into the local system and, more importantly, into older people's pockets. So those are just 4 examples of some of the communities that we work with that make up some of the 81 members of the UK network of age-friendly communities. There's a whole host of different places here, ranging from towns, districts, cities, counties and city regions that are embedding that approach in a way that works for them and looking to make improvements that respond to their own kind of opportunities and challenges. And we support at the Centre for Ageing Better these communities through their journey to do the work as well as possible, learn from research and learn from one another and build a sense of age-friendly movement around this work across the country. So I'll stop there, but happy to just chat later.
That's great. Thank you so much, Charlotte. So next up we have Sir Tony Baldry.
Thank you. So Banbury is a sort of edge of West Midlands town, about 20 miles north of here, population of about 60,000, with a disproportionately large number of older people, because in the 1970s, Banbury was an overspill town. Indeed, it was nearly a new town. They built some huge estates from which a large number of people from London and Birmingham were decanted, all as young families who came to work at General Foods and Alcan and other ProDrive and other places in the town. And so all of those families grew older together, and not surprisingly now, most of those people many of those people arrived in their 20s and 30s in the 1970s and now in their 70s and 80s. So Banbury has a higher than average older population. Before the years of austerity, the county council used to fund some service level agreements for organisations such as Age UK to have offices around the county in towns like Banbury, providing coordinating services for older people. They started to disappear. And so a few of us in about 2016 thought, well, we had to do something about this. How did we do this? And so we set up and started an initiative, which I'm sure is part of Charlotte's web, called Age Friendly Banbury, or how do we make Banbury an age-friendly town? This is an organisation without a constitution, without any formal membership. There's an Oxfordshire charity which gives a bit of money to the Oxfordshire Community Foundation, which in turn gives a bit of money to Age UK to employ a 2-day-a-week coordinator. We have a leadership group of about half a dozen of us and a partnership group of about 50 organisations. And the idea is that if everyone who has something to do with older people comes together and we can coordinate that and get the best out of the synergy of all of that, then that will then help provide a much better mesh to support those elder, lonely, disabled in the town. So we have the leadership group meets about once every 6 weeks. The partnership group meets about 4 or 5 times a year. The partnership group, Charlotte had this sort of flower, which actually we've also adopted as a logo, with all these different things. So the partnership group, we usually take a topic for each one of those partnership meetings. So it might be dementia or mental health or something of that kind. And then we try and find every partner organisation that has something to do with that. And it's amazing the number of, over time, the number of different organisations that we find, from, you know, Men in Sheds to the Community Garden to Dementia Active, a whole number of different, some local, some national that have local organisations such as the Royal Voluntary Service, Age UK, of course, Citizens Advice, and all these organisations coming together, sharing knowledge, sharing ideas, and prompting each other to have initiatives. We have good support from the Cherwell District Council, and what is quite interesting is that we from time to time do questionnaires of older people. And one not so long ago, I think about 1,000 responses. And what was their greatest concern? Well, a whole number of categories. It was transport, but it wasn't transport in terms of we need more buses. Their greatest concern under transport was that when elder people went into Banbury Town Centre, were they going to get caught short? Public toilets in Banbury being closed, where could they go? And, you know, genuinely quite a lot of older people saying, we don't want to slip down to town and then find ourselves in an embarrassing situation. So, I mean, an initiative that Age Friendly Banbury has taken is we went around every business in the town centre which has toilets, and we said, look, this is our logo. If you're willing to allow older people who aren't necessarily customers of yours to come in to use your facilities, would you like to put this logo in your window? And a lot have done so. And we have in Banbury a business investment district, so a BID, and we're working with the BID as partners. So the BID are helping us get to all of their members and saying, what can you do as a member of the BID, which is mostly businesses in the historic marketplace, the market type of Banbury Town Centre, what can you do to help older people, and what can we do collectively to tackle loneliness and isolation and make Banbury a better place for older people. We have a number of, under the leadership group, we have a number of working groups, so you know, walking groups, various groups that are working together on particular issues. It tends to evolve, so the leadership group, people tend to go on the leadership group for 2 or 3 years and then they kind of naturally sort of fade away and other people come in. But we've been going now for 8 years and we're still going strong. And I think probably not having a constitution and not having formal membership helps, because we then don't have rows about who should represent the county council, who should represent the district council, who should the town council. That just sort of happens, really. I think some bits we've managed to do really quite well. I think some bits they're still work in progress. So I think that our engagement with the NHS is increasingly complicated. How do older people engage with the NHS? And it's been said, I was a member of Parliament for over 3 decades. I left in 2015. I'm now totally neutral as the Deputy Lieutenant and High Steward of Banbury, apolitical. Even now, even someone like myself who'd been enmeshed in the machinery of government for the vast majority, most of my life, find the machinery of the NHS quite difficult. We used to have a community health council. We used to have things like that. So how, patient participation groups, how do older people engage with the NHS other than through their GP? But if they can't contact their GP, how do they do that? So I think that is still very much work in progress. But I hope that we're conscious that this is is always going to be work in progress. But I hope that the initiative we've taken is making Banbury an age-friendlier town. We are, I think, the only town in Oxfordshire that has this initiative. I think Age UK tried to get it going in Oxford and some other places, but I'm proud and pleased to say that we are going strong in Banbury, and I hope we can give ideas to other towns and communities as to initiatives that they can take to make older people live a happier, more fulfilled, better, less lonely, less isolated life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Kelly Marie Rogers. You can just yeah, there you go. Brilliant. Hi. So as mentioned, my name is Kelly and I'm going to be talking to you today about our Creating Age-Friendly Developments Guide that we launched in Greater Manchester by the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. So I'm part of the Greater Manchester Housing, Ageing and Planning Group. It's a group of multidisciplinary, cross-sector kind of agents who really feel engaged in this work, and I've been in that group for about 18 months. When I joined, certainly there was a lot of stuff that we were doing, but there was a space that we wanted to move into where that was actually kind of seeing the kind of our influence being built in Greater Manchester and being able to point to places and say that's an age-friendly development. And when we were talking to architects and developers, the things that we would say when we said about age-friendly housing or age-friendly developments was, you don't do extra care housing. Well, all housing should be age-friendly. If we talked about age-friendly again, they would say, oh, it's about Part M, which is one of our building regulations. And we're saying, well, it's not just about Part M. It's a broader definition of what it is that we're trying to kind of influence. So it became increasingly clear that we needed to have something in our hand that actually just set out our stall, I suppose, and took the voices from Greater Manchester's older adults that we'd spoken to and kind of defined it ready and kind of to be able to give to those designers and developers. So that's where we came up with the idea of the guide, and that is really to support developers, planners and policymakers, as well as designers themselves to deliver age-friendly developments, homes and neighbourhoods. And when we were kind of designing the guide, we acknowledged that places and neighbourhoods and people are all really unique, and what age-friendly means to them is also really unique. So it's not a prescriptive set of checklists of do X, Y, and Z, and then you'll become age-friendly. But it's more about kind of creating prompts and considerations that allow us to kind of explore what this might mean to that particular development within the capacity that project has. So what I'll do is I'll talk you through a couple of the sections and give you a bit of a flavour of what it is that we've been trying to kind of include within the guide. So the first kind of step was to really centre who it was that we're designing for, pointing out and kind of really playing out the roles that older adults play in our communities, the wealth of insights and knowledge and intersectional experiences that can help support more nuanced proposals, and really kind of specifically talking about the fact that we don't actually show older adults in the imagery in the architectural process very often, and if we do, they're not being active and kind of really enjoying themselves in that neighbourhood and home. So that's a really simple cultural shift that we can make by just actually including imagery of older adults within our marketing and within kind of planning imagery. The second kind of section that we moved on to, just kind of pulling out one of those points, is about thinking about that whole age-friendly kind of neighbourhood. So thinking about how you move, how you play, how you relax, and as well as how you access necessary services and facilities. And we do that acknowledging that one singular development can't provide everything, but it's about really kind of asking developers and architects to think outside of the red line, look at what's kind of being offered within that neighbourhood already, and actually just kind of asking themselves what's the role that we can play within this development to help make sure that broader patina has been kind of provided within the neighbourhood. And specifically what we wanted to kind of point to and what we're hearing in Greater Manchester coming up more and more often is intergenerational connection. It's about social connections, and it's about having spaces where older adults can inhabit, where they can connect with others, and particularly cross-generational. So one of the kind of suggestions that we've made within the guide is to really think about the role that older adults play in relation to the younger generations, and acknowledging the increasing role as caregivers that they play in our communities. And when you really think about it, we do like to separate users and uses, and particularly when it comes to play spaces in particular. So on the left-hand side is the kind of the classic scene of a British park that you might imagine, with a little kind of loopy green fence that kind of separates out the older adults and the younger children that they're kind of playing with. So what we're suggesting is, can we start to think about intergenerational play spaces, the activities and the types of movements that young children like to do to build strength and mobility can still be something that could be fun for older adults to maintain strength and agility, and this actually makes a more pleasant kind of bonding experience for everybody involved. So one of the suggestions is to really kind of push into that kind of second imagery. We're asking people to play together and to move and to kind of enjoy and build those social connections. And then finally in the guide we start to move into the home itself, so really kind of thinking about quite practically how you move through that space, how you access equipment, the ergonomics of storage and how you might show off treasured belongings, how you have a sense of identity in that home and how you kind of show off your sense of identity within that home. And really specifically, one of the points that we're kind of offering within the guide itself is to think about quite practical things. So the first kind of set of images is really about talking about the ironmongery that we tend to specify as architects, and there's been a bit of a trend to specify this hidden profile on the left-hand side that I have in my actual apartment, which is terrifically difficult to use and terrifically impractical. And actually, if you then Google age-friendly ironmongery, you get just the most horrific kind of like big clunky medical stuff kind of being shown to you. But actually, it doesn't need to be medical. It can still be a beautiful object that's within the home, but it's actually practical to use and to kind of manipulate. And secondly, on the second set of images is actually just to think about our communal amenities. We're investing a lot in our active travel infrastructure in Greater Manchester. Huge amount of kind of spaces that are being created all around the city region. And yet, when we look at the plans of cycle storage that we're creating within the city region, actually a lot of it looks like that big double stack bike storage that's terrifically difficult to manipulate and get a bike on. So actually what we're asking for is cycle stands. We're asking for stands that can accommodate larger bikes, accessible bikes, and that would actually mean that our older adults can get out and kind of use the B network, as we're calling it. So that's a kind of a bit of a flavour of the guide. That's about 3 points of the 62 or so. We're really pleased that people are starting to pick it up. We've had several events to try and kind of advertise that we've got this thing, and you know, if you can follow this, you'll be doing a great job. But also to kind of come and engage with us. And we're also thinking about what the next stages are. We don't have age-friendly developments systemically kind of embedded within Greater Manchester just yet, but we are working on that. And our second plan, second kind of step or within the process is we're thinking about benches. So we're thinking at the moment and kind of drawing inspirations and precedents of where we've been able to do benches really well. And we're going to have a bit of a media campaign about that later in the year. So we're still moving, still thinking, but I'm glad to have something in our hands to be able to point to. Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. That was great. And finally, Professor George Leeson.
Yes, thank you. As was mentioned, I'm at the Institute of Population Ageing next door. There are some brochures on the table there, which were produced to celebrate our 20th anniversary. We're now working on our 25th anniversary brochure, and it tells you a little bit about the work we do. We are a global research institute looking at population ageing. And I have to underline the fact that it's population ageing. It's not about old people. It's about that process that is happening in our populations. And let's just reflect on that a little bit to put this into that perspective of the changing demography that we have in the world. And it is a global phenomenon now. We're at different stages, different rates, but the whole world is aging. And there are three demographic components that drive our demographic change. It's mortality, it's childbearing, and it's immigration. And they form our populations at any given point in time, and the subpopulations at any given point in time. And therefore, of course, the aging of our population means more older people living longer, and thankfully, for a large majority of them, longer and healthier lives than previous generations. But the word inequalities has been mentioned, so let's just park that and have that at the back of our minds all the time that we're speaking about this. And let me come at this from a different angle, because we've got experts on age-friendly neighbourhoods here, and some of my colleagues from the Institute are here who are doing a lot of work in this area. But let's focus on what this population ageing for a moment is also bringing with it. We've stopped having children. That is at the core of our challenge in the 21st century. And again, it is almost a global phenomenon. Africa is the last continent of youth. But even there, levels of childbearing are coming down. So the family, when we talk about the family, and we hear the family being mentioned continuously by all stakeholders as having a key role to play, and I asked, what family are we talking about? The family has gone in terms of numbers, and even with children, those families will experience their children perhaps living at a great distance. The family is not the key to support anymore. And I think if we want to talk about, and I'm a little wary of using the word age-friendly, and it then gets interpreted as old person friendly. So it's a citizen-friendly neighbourhood that we need. And those neighbourhoods, communities, need to also take into account the fact that you, the community, are replacing the family. Okay? Can we design ourselves out of that challenge? A community that replaces the family. We can create spaces, and it's happening, and we've heard a lot of what is being done about creating the spaces. But what's missing? We talk about intergenerational communities. I live in a little village just north of Oxford. It's an intergenerational village, but are there intergenerational relationships in that village? No. The generations don't come together, especially now that the pub is closed. So, how do we create communities that enable and encourage generations to come together? That is key to meeting some of the objectives that Kelly mentioned. You know, several of those objectives, I couldn't help thinking, my goodness, in their own right, they are huge challenges. Raising awareness of the value of older people in society. Wow. I mean, that in itself, you know, there are organisations around the world that have been working for the last 50 years trying to do that. And it's slowly beginning to happen. But my goodness, it's slow. And are they valued? Let's be honest. Not really. Not really. So we need to create communities that bring generations together so that we learn about one another. And that's how we then begin to respect one another. Diversity was mentioned, and it's not just diversity across ages, it's across all sorts of groups. And it's by learning about those groups that we can begin to respect. And once we begin to respect, we can begin to support. So communities where older people, younger people of all ages don't feel afraid when they step out of their front door. And it's not necessarily feeling afraid because of getting mugged or that group of young men in their hoodies down on the corner. It can be something like, where am I going to find a loo once I'm half a mile away from my home? Or it could be, there are so many broken slabs. Let's not even go into potholes. There are so many broken slabs on the pavements. There are so many things that make walking in our communities, which contributes to health, both physical and mental health. There are so many of those barriers in our communities. And therefore, the result is many people, not just older people, but many people remain in their own homes. They don't go out into their communities. So where do we begin? It's almost an impossible challenge. Where do we begin? And I think design is important, but I think we have to be careful to think that we can design ourselves out of this challenge. It's part of the solution to the challenge. But let me finish these 5 minutes by just emphasising a point that I made, that we need to be developing communities that become our family, because our families are not there. And we need that human support. We haven't even mentioned the technologies that are being put in place. Will they socially isolate us even more, or will they make our quality of life better? So many questions hanging there, so I'll stop there. Anna, thanks.
Thank you very much for all the speakers. And we have one other speaker as well that is joining us remotely today. I'm going to show the video now, if that's okay. We have, Kelly has shared with us a video from one of the projects that you're working on, isn't that right? And I'm just going to make sure that you can see it. Hopefully the noise is good. I'm going to go for play. Do you want to just maybe introduce this? We could use the microphone and just sort of introduce...
So I suppose kind of,
You just have to slide it for...
yeah. So I suppose kind of picking up on your point about feeling safe. So this is a product of a workshop that we did with the GM Aging Hub in a kind of Aging Place pathfinder work. And we were exploring senses of feelings of safety with a group of women, and we've kind of filmed it. Well, I've not the GM Aging Hub. I've actually kind of filmed it up and kind of made it into a bit of a video that now is their statement of what feeling safe and secure in their communities looks and feels like for the older adults involved in particular.
Let's hear from them.
We've history to unpick, messages to unstick, joyful boxes to tick, to create places and spaces to be proud, visible, out loud, places of community and unity. We could be rebellious, unshackled, run wild, play and hang out, enjoy joyful ways to get about, no need to be responsible, to be home before dark. We could go wherever, whenever, and wear what we want after dark in the park. Dance on pews, sing in the loos, fun things for us all to do. Music with our brew, our places and spaces, welcoming and safe. We'll feel relaxed, inclusive and happy. There's no need to be brave, social and active, participatory places to be. Me. Spaces where we are free, intergenerational, connection, respect, giggles and laughter.
Yeah, I think that follows really nicely on from George's point. So we've now heard from all our speakers, and it's now over to the audience for anyone that might have any questions or comments. If anyone does have a question, if you could raise your hand, and Juliet will come over to you with the microphone. And if you wouldn't mind as well, just introducing yourselves as well, that would be great. So thank you.
I moved back to Oxford 5 years ago from living in Bath. The two cities are very similar. They've both got universities, and they have large cohorts of people who worked in education and health and postgraduates, etc. So in my cohort, where we're very politically active, we're campaigned for social justice. We all grow our own vegetables, we repair things, we cycle, we walk, etc. So I'd like to focus on one thing, which is local food. It's something that I used to be involved in. When I moved back to Oxford, I bought a big map, drew on it all the bus routes, and then marked on it where the local shops were, where you could actually go and drop in and buy a pint of milk or whatever. And there were very few. I mean, there are whole areas of Oxford which aren't on bus routes, and place that I chose, I mean, one bus route has been cancelled completely, the Oxfordshire, the county council are trying to close bus stops, a particular bus stop, because people stand at it and it looks untidy and people block the pavement. Oh, it's just ridiculous. But anyway, on local food, if you the council produces a proposals map which is attached to the local plan, and it marks on it retail centres, but it doesn't mark the community shops. And actually, there's a lot more that the council could do. I don't know if there's anybody from the council here today. But for instance, they could have, like other cities do, a retail strategy so that you mark where the convenience stores are, where the local shopping areas are, and where the destination shopping areas are. So in Oxford, if it was like Bristol, the equivalent of Cowley Road in Bristol is called a destination shopping centre. People go there for a day out to eat well, buy well food, etc., etc. But the proposals map has just been reissued with the emerging local plan, and again, there's nothing. My local parade of shops isn't even marked on the plan. So I'm hoping that you'll feed in somehow to the council, because this also applies to low traffic neighbourhoods and 15-minute walking neighbourhoods too. Thanks.
Thank you. Do any of our panellists have any comments or response to that?
Well, I think it's a very good point. So in Banbury, we have a situation. I mean, obviously Banbury is smaller than Oxford. We're still 60,000 people, and so when I first arrived in Banbury, there were no supermarkets. And over the last 30 years, we've seen Sainsbury's, Tesco's, Morrison's, Waitrose, and they're all on the edge of town. And that's great because they provide the numbers of people going shopping them demonstrate the need. But that leaves a lot of people in the town centre. And for a while, that was fine because Marks and Spencer's had an anchor store in Castle Quay, which was the main shopping mall in Banbury. And then Marks and Spencer decided to move out. So all the older people, and there are a lot of older people who live in Banbury town centre, because there's quite a lot of housing being built, flats and so on being built for over 55s in Banbury town centre. Where were they going to go? So one of the things that we did was pretty similar to that which you did. We actually physically walked around the town, working out every store and shop that actually sold fruit, vegetables, milk and so on. And it was a surprisingly large number because whilst the supermarkets moved out, others have moved in. So there are quite a lot of Polish delis and Romanian shops and other shops that have come in, but there are quite a lot of them selling fresh produce and Italian shops and so on and so forth. And so different sorts of shops, and we were able to build up a kind of a map and a leaflet which enabled older people living in the town centre to pretty much replace and replicate everything that Marks and Spencer's have been selling before, but in slightly different places.
Any other questions? Thank you.
I have one. I think you touched on it, and I wanted to know if any of you had any comments on the potential impact of smartphone technology on older generations in cities. So, for example, now when we make GP appointments, you can still phone in, but if you want, you'll be encouraged to do it online. To do it online, you actually have to download an app. When you want to repeat orders for prescriptions, you have to download an app. And I suspect this is disproportionately affecting older folk. I don't know that. But for example, also in John Lewis, they've now got a policy where they don't put pricing on a lot of their goods. And I was going around saying, well, how much is this? How much is that? They said, oh, you have to download our app. And that really alienates the kind of experience for older people. And I just wanted to know if this was something that any of you were providing guidance on, or were interested in? Is this something that has even been talked about?
Yes, if you want to start and then pass the mic along. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the major challenges that many of the communities we work with are facing. And I shared earlier those sort of 8 domain areas that we think communities should be thinking about. And one of those is around communication and information. And that's about how people receive information, whether that's about social opportunities or about kind of vital services and things like that. And thinking about digital is an absolutely core element of that. And we would say that in an age-friendly community, there should be access to kind of digital upskilling opportunities, but that all vital services should be available with an offline option as well. There's lots of guidance out there. There's lots of things that, in Greater Manchester, I know they've done some great work on doing digital in later life. There is research and kind of around this. I think there's so many different agencies involved that there's things that potentially you can influence the council to do, but trying to influence big national organisations like your John Lewis is a different kind of ballgame to that sort of local place-based stuff. But you're absolutely right, and it is something that lots of communities are considering, but it's a harder thing to do. And I think the final thing I'd say is on the sort of digital upskilling side of things, we would say it's a really core part of what should be on offer, but to offer those sort of skills and training in a way that's asking people what they want to be able to do. Often assumptions are made about what digital skills people want and need, but often what people want to be able to do is FaceTime their relative who lives somewhere, or do the shopping online, or use Facebook or something like that. So when those skills are offered, that it should be about having a conversation with people about what skills they want to develop and what they want to achieve to do what they want to do in their life, rather than making assumptions about what skills people want and need.
Yeah, sorry.
We go along. Yeah.
Yeah, there is quite a substantial amount of research on technologies, including smartphones, not just among older people, but younger generations as well. We assume that everyone is comfortable with these new technologies, which is very far from the truth when you look at the evidence. And I think there's a fundamental question we have to ask here, and that is, what is driving these technologies? Is it what people need, or is it simply the fact that they can be developed? And I'm a bit of a cynic, so I think it's because they can be developed, and therefore they're developed, and there is huge amounts of money behind them pushing these developments into our homes and into our pockets. We've all got one. And increasingly it is marginalising certain groups, maybe the older people more disproportionately. For example, in Italy, there is now a national health app. That is the only way that you can access anything to do with national health services in Italy. There is no default. You can't do the old-fashioned thing of actually talking to a person. So if you can't use the app yourself, you have to get someone to help you and do it for you. Where does this end? But I think, again, the fundamental question is, who is driving this? And I think it's shocking, given the speed at which these technological developments are happening, that a country like the UK, or maybe I'm not surprised in a country like the UK, that we don't have a national digital strategy to make sure that everybody is on board. You know, there are pieces of initiatives scattered around the country, but there's not a national initiative making sure that everybody is on board so that they can keep up with this technological development. And I think that would make a lot of difference to not just older people, but to everyone. Because it happens so quickly that I think, you know, it's not just between young people and old people. I think even within the group that we regard as young, there are people who are being left behind by the new technologies. That includes me, by the way.
Yeah, well, all I was going to say was, as one of those who was, I've done my bit in having children, and the only real value of children as teenagers is that they can help one with one's technology, and you then discover just when you really need them, little bugs have left home, which is really useless. But I mean, I think the reality is the genie is out of the bottle, and apps are here, and they're going to stay, and they're going to get developed more, and wider local authorities and other bodies use apps because the transactional costs are a lot cheaper and a lot less expensive, and money can be saved in that way. And there are lots of benefits. Today I came by train from Banbury, and I was able to book my ticket online. I have a ticket on my iPhone, and it's a lot easier than having to buy a physical ticket and all that kind of stuff. But clearly, there are older people who were born before all this technology became second nature. And so in Banbury, we've been trying through the RVS and various other groups in Banbury. We do actually have teams that help people, try to understand their iPhones, their iPads, and so on and so forth. Particularly the case during COVID, and this is obviously going to be a continuous work in progress. I mean, it will just take time. And I have to say, I'm not quite sure what the word is. I got a phobia. I have a phobia about passwords. Okay, I'm constantly trying to remember different passwords and where should I store my passwords. I mean, it's like a nightmare. But actually, I have to acknowledge. I mean, I do realise that everything's going online. Banking's going online. All these things going online. So the technology is bound to. We're not going to be able to halt this technology. What we have to try and ensure, though, is that people don't get left behind, and that we can help people wherever we can master the technology, be able to use it. Now, and clearly, there are some areas, such as the NHS and so on, where there does have to be default, where people can actually speak to human beings, they can't actually use the technology. But I think trying to help people be able to use it is probably better than trying to say, well, we shouldn't have the technology available to us.
Kelly, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I suppose, yeah, so from thinking about my perspective, thinking about creating buildings and architecture and kind of development processes, you are seeing a kind of a shift into using more digital tools of kind of engagement and consulting when you're designing a building, and that was partly kind of shifted a little bit through COVID because there was a necessity. I think the thing that we talk about is there will always be value of having a conversation in a room, and particularly when you think about planning and developing of buildings, there is the sense of trust isn't always where it needs to be, and actually kind of having a conversation in a space with someone will always be needed and valuable, and particularly if you're able to go to the place where you're actually talking about and stand there and kind of have a conversation in space, and yeah, I suppose just also just naming that lots of people don't have technology, not just older adults, so it's not just about skills, it's about poverty and lots of different things. So
yeah, George, did you want to say something?
Well, yeah, just to pick up, I mean, from a personal point of view, I don't buy into the idea that it's here and therefore we've got to accept it. We can say that about so many things. In Spain, a wonderful initiative in Spain, a wonderful example of, if you like, people power, I suppose it's called. There was one of the bank chains which we've experienced in this country was closing all of its high street branches, and people, not just older people, but people actually took to the streets and demonstrated, saying, no, we actually want a bank that we can go into. We don't want to be doing it on a gadget. All the banks were reopened. So we don't have to just sit back and say, well, it's gone too far now, we can't turn around. I think there are lots of aspects of technology that do make our lives easier, and thank goodness for that. But just to leave it to the whim of the technology nerds, I think is rather dangerous.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions?
Thanks very much. It's just, I guess, Charlotte's map when you looked at age-friendly networks, I think most people in the room were looking for Oxford, and it's not there. And Tony, you've obviously been, led through the Banbury group, and it sounds like it's a group of volunteers and having partnerships, and you almost have a perfect happy storm to create a network. But I wonder if you could comment, what are the roadblocks to creating age-friendly networks, and why is Oxford not on the map? Or what is the process? Because they sound to be like a very helpful way of creating, I think George's excellent comment about citizen-friendly neighbourhoods. But if we're starting with age-friendly, what are the roadblocks, and how do you create? What's the crucible for creating these networks? It would be nice to see lots more. I'm sure you'd like to see lots more.
Certainly trying to get Oxford on the map. Yeah, I thought that question might come up, that Oxford and Oxfordshire aren't on that map. I've had conversations at both levels, and there are people trying to move it forward, but it's not an easy thing to do, especially at a whole county level. How you implement this stuff at that scale is really hard, and sometimes it's so hard that people don't get far enough along the journey on it. So in terms of the we work with the communities that want to do this work. We don't spend a lot of time banging down the door of places that don't, and kind of support those who do. And as I've said, we have had some conversations at the kind of Oxford and Oxfordshire level, but that's slowly developing. Some of the kind of main challenges for people is the resource for this work. It's that the framework I showed, it's cross-cutting. It has to involve lots of different people and partners, but that means it's difficult to say whose responsibility it is. There's not a national or local responsibility specific around kind of ageing and older people. So, and in Wales, there's a specific requirement for the local authority areas to adopt this age-friendly approach. To a slightly lesser extent in Northern Ireland. In England and Scotland, there's no requirement for local areas to do anything about this. So the areas that are on that map is generally, it's led by a really engaged persons group that really want to make this happen and move it through the political processes, find the funding, build the partnership. So it's kind of down to that individual sort of will a little bit, in a way that it's not quite the same in other parts of the UK and other parts of the world. So responsibility, resourcing, and kind of demonstrating impact is hard with this. But like I said, there's not a 10-point plan that communities should follow to be age-friendly. It's down to those individual places to build like the partnerships in Banbury and understand what residents want and then take action on those things. But that can be a little bit nebulous for people to kind of understand and kind of get around. But to become what we would sort of define as that age-friendly community and join that network, there needs to be political commitment for this work that's sort of laid out by the World Health Organization. So if you want to write to your councillor and ask them to commit to make Oxford, Oxfordshire an age-friendly community, we've got a template letter you can use or write yourself. But yeah, I'd love to see Oxford or Oxfordshire and Oxfordshire part of that network.
So something about demographics.
Mm-hmm.
That in Oxford, 35. Sorry, this is about demographics. In Oxford, 35% of the population weren't born in the UK, so it's a very multicultural city, and you'll have different cultural norms, and we're not particularly good at looking after our elderly people in this country. And the other point, but more widely about Oxfordshire, is that it's a much younger population than a lot of counties. So it's interesting to look at the demographics when you're thinking about this.
Yeah, it absolutely is. But we also have the youngest boroughs in London that are part of our network. So there is a real impetus for the communities where there is a really high percentage of older population, that the need to do it is slightly different. But from if we think about London Borough of Newham or Hackney that are part of our network, it becomes a more inequalities perspective that you're bringing to this about how involved and kind of valued do your older residents feel, rather than perhaps that really big demographic shift that you see in other places. But the value is still important. It's just kind of a slightly different focus. But
so I think you probably need three things. So you need someone to get the ball rolling as a convener, and I suppose I was fortunate in that having been the Member of Parliament for 30 years, if I wrote to lots of people and said, would you come to a meeting, they'd turn up even out of curiosity to see what I was up to. So, so the first thing is getting someone who will act as a convener. So someone who has the ability to convene. I mean, it could be a senior church person, a recognised community leader. I think also then there needs to be confidence. If one's not going to spend days and months and forming some constitution and working out, particularly in Oxfordshire, which is 2 and often a 3-tier local authority, because in Banbury we have a Banbury Town Council, Cherwell District Council, Oxfordshire County Council. If you're not going to spend ages, you have to have a structure where the chief executives were confident that they could send staff. So in both the leadership group and the partnership group, we almost always have staff from officers from the town, district and county council turn up, and chief executives being confident they're not going to get hijacked, or they're not suddenly going to find all sorts of spending contributions. So somehow we've managed to work where officers come and they explain what the district council is doing or town council is doing. They often G each other up, but there had to be a fear that they had a respect they weren't going to get hijacked. And the third was a bit of money for a coordinator. So a lot of this is done by volunteers. But Oxfordshire is very, very fortunate in having the Oxfordshire Community Foundation, OCF, and OCF gets money from all sorts of philanthropists and other charities and so on and so forth. So I'm perfectly confident if someone in Oxford got the ball rolling and set up a group, the Oxfordshire Community Foundation would probably be willing to help fund a coordinator, but it's just actually getting the ball rolling. And we literally wrote to every organisation. I said, we now got 50, for a town like Banbury, which is much smaller than Oxford, we've got 50 partner organisations, including, of course, the mosque and representatives, the various, we clearly haven't got the range of ethnic diversity that Oxford has, but we still have a fairly, wide ethnic diversity. And so a number of those obviously are partner groups. And I think providing everyone feels that a direction of travel, then everyone's trying to get to the answer yes. And so it has a momentum of its own and it kind of works. Well, it does work, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for the insight into how we can set it up in Oxford. Some things to think about over some refreshments now, so I'm conscious of time, and we'll wrap things up there. So we will now be having some refreshments. You're very welcome to stay and join us for those. And just to let you know that we have been recording this presentation and it will be available on our website over the next week or so. So if you would like to share this with anybody, please do so. And you can also check out our other seminars if you would like to. We run these seminars during week 1 and 8 of each semester. So our next seminar will be held on Wednesday, the 16th of October. It's a little while away now, but put that date in your diary, and we'll announce the topic of that soon. But it will be within the remit of healthy urbanism as usual. So thank you everyone for your questions and for your engagement throughout, and thank you to everyone behind the scenes who, with your support, for organising this event. And please could you join me once again to thank our panellists for a great discussion of this topic. Thank you.